May a Jew enter HaHabayit today? Notice that I deliberately call it the HaHabayit and not the Temple Mount, because the two things do not mean the same thing, as will become clear momentarily. The reason why this was sort of on my mind is because we're organizing a mission to Israel, and someone said, there was someone in our community that just brought a group of people to the Temple Mount. The BAYT should do the same thing, and we should go up to the Temple Mount, and we should do something up there. And so I said, I have to really research that issue, because I know that there's some controversy involved about going up to the Temple Mount. So let's take a look at the halachic sources and see. There was a wonderful, comprehensive article detailing the halachic issues in the summer 2010 issue of Chakira Journal, for anyone who gets that. So a lot of our sources come straight out of that journal. Tonight will be part one, where we're going to go through the primary sources that are pre-modern, in other words, going through only the 16th century. And then, Amir Hashem, the next time, we'll take a look at some contemporary tshuvas that are based upon the modern phenomenon of our access to HaHabayit b'yadeinu. So, this is not, 1967 is not the first time that Jews had access to HaHabayit, but it's the first time that we have control, or so to speak, we have control. It's not real control. We sort of, at one point, might have had control, but no longer. So obviously there are some political considerations as well. Even if we determine halachically that it is permitted to go up to certain parts, to the temple, what is called the Temple Mount today, there may be other considerations which would be compelling for us not to, nonetheless. One of them could be is that if you and I go up to the Temple Mount, let's assume that there are certain places where we're permitted to go. There may be other people who would see Jews with yarmulkes going up to the Temple Mount, and they might not be aware of the same level of restriction that we practice, and that the way that we comport ourselves both before and during the time that we're on the Temple Mount. And therefore it could be subject to abuse by others who are unaware of the halacha. Another consideration are the very, very real political considerations of doing an act of provocation which could result, chas v'shalom, in violence. So one has to know and take into account some of these factors as well. The diagram that I have in the first page is directly out of that journal from the Chakira Journal that was written by Rabbis Meyer and Messner. And it's important to know that the Temple Mount, as we know it today, is about close to 500 meters in length and about 300 meters in width. It's not exactly a perfect rectangle. It's trapezoid, I guess you could call it, or a rhombus. I'm not sure which one is which. But either way, it's certainly not but it's approximately close to 500 on the east and on the west, and around 300 both in the north and the south. The Gemara itself acknowledges that the Temple Mount is not a perfect rectangle, that it is shorter in front, or narrower in front and wider in the back. But even more than that, we know from the Mishnah, this is source number one, from the Mishnah in Midos, that HaHabayit. Now, does everyone understand what we mean when we talk about the HaHabayit, the Temple Mount? Let's be very clear. The Temple Mount is a piece of property that contains the temple structure on it. But it is much larger than the temple structure itself, because there's a lot of it is open space, because people would have to come up to the Temple Mount and congregate in large droves of populations during different periods of the year, so there needed to be area outside of the temple proper in order for people to congregate. So HaHabayit haya 500 ama al 500 ama. The Temple Mount was 500 by 500 amas. Now, think about it for a second. How much is an amma in halacha? There's a big machlokas as to the exact measure of an amma, but we wouldn't be going too big or too small to say that it's about a half a meter. So if you say that 500 amos by 500 amos is the total measurement of the Temple Mount, so you're only talking about 250 meters by 250 meters. And that's much smaller than the area that is depicted in today's floor plan of the Temple Mount. So this is very important for halachic considerations, because if what is today the Temple Mount, we can identify those portions of the current Temple Mount that are not part of the original HaHabayit, that'll make a tremendous difference. Then there won't even be any Shiloh, and that's just another part of Jerusalem where I can go, right? So we have to also identify, is there a part of the Temple Mount that is not part of the halachic HaHabayit or not? So it seems clear from the Mishnah that certainly, and you see from the diagram, that based on an approximation, based on certain measurements, the Dome of the Rock is considered to be the part of the Temple Mount proper, but it's not really clear. There's obviously it's clear the entire Al-Aqsa Mosque, for example, which is the Silver Dome, is completely outside what is considered to be Har Habayis proper. Okay. Now, as far as how it became that way, that you have a level mound of land and only a part of it is the Temple Mount, well, the topology of the soil has shifted over the course of generations, and also there was a lot of excavation on the Temple Mount. After the destructions of the temple, they razed the whole thing to the ground. So it's not surprising that you should have a lot more flat land where the Temple Mount was than the actual Temple Mount. And we're going to see that some of the Meforshim actually point this out. The Rabbi points this out as well. So the Temple Mount originally in the Mishnah is 500 by 500. Rubo min hadarom, that the majority of open space, which means open field, which is not temple, of the Temple Mount, is in the southern part of the Temple Mount. Sheni lo min hamizrach, the second largest amount of open space that is not temple, is the east. Shlishi lo min hatzafon, the third largest amount of space is from the north, and miuto min hamarav, and the smallest amount of real estate outside of the temple on the Temple Mount is from the west. Makam shayarov midasu sham hayarov tashmisho, and obviously the temple was built in such a way to position it such that the more open space that there was, the more population was able to congregate in that area. So that's the first thing we need to clarify. Next thing we need to clarify is, Bichlal, is there any halacha about restrictions on entering the Temple Mount? So far we've said, well, the Temple Mount has some kind of special status. Well, what special status does it have? And that's based upon a Gemara that learns the Psukim that we just read in Parshas Naso a couple of weeks ago. The Torah in Parshas Naso, Perek Hey, says, Tzavis b'nei Yisrael v'yishalachu min ha'machaneh kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tamei lanafesh. That give charge to the Jewish people, and they shall throw out of or send out of the camp any person who has leprosy, and any person who has tumah of a zav, and any person who has come in contact with the dead. Now the Gemara in Psachim tells us that there are different types of tumah that are described in this pasuk, have different halachos vis-a-vis how far outside the camp you must send them. There are different components of the camp of Israel that is encamped in the desert. You have the innermost camp, which is where the Mishkan is. That is surrounded in the desert by the Machane Leviah, which is where the tribe of Levi encamps all around the Mishkan. And around that was Machane Yisrael. That was the camp of Israel. And as the Gemara in Psachim says, we'll learn it in Rashi. Rashi's commentary on this pasuk teaches us that depending upon what type of tumah you have will determine how far or which camps you're not allowed to be a part of in your state of tumah. And then once we determine that based on the biblical law, then we have to be able to correspond to that to the law of the temple in Jerusalem. Because obviously when the Torah was given, it is written for the three camps that are positioned or encamped in the desert. And how does that translate to three camps when we talk about Yerushalayim? So comes along Rashi and tells us that v'yishalachu min hamachaneh. This is just Rashi's commentary on Chumash. It's just convenient because it's an encapsulation of the Sugya in Psachim that discusses this law. Shalosh machanos hayu sham bishas chani yasan. There are three camps. Toch hakilaim himachane shechina. Within the curtains of the Mishkan is considered to be the Machane Shechina. That is the camp of the divine presence. That's the Mishkan itself. Chanias Halaviyim Saviv, Kemoshe Meforash Beparshas Bamidbar Sinai, Hi Machane Levia. The second camp, which is around that, surrounds that, as is explained in Parshas Bamidbar Sinai, is the Levite camp. Umisham V'ad Sof Machane Hadigalim L'chol Arba Haruchos, Hi Machane Yisrael. And from that point going outwards, where the Jewish people are encamped, is called Machane Yisrael. What's the ramification of having three camps? Because there are different kinds of tumah. Hatsarua nishtala chutz lekulan. If you have tsaras, you're out of all of the camps. Because there the Torah says, badad yeshev, you got to be all alone. You can't be with anybody. Hazav, if you have an abnormal seminal emission, so that is mutter b'machane Yisrael. You're allowed to dwell with in the Israelite camp. Umeshulach min hashtayim, but you have to be removed from the Shechina camp and the Levite camp. V'tamei lanefesh mutar af b'shel Levia ve'eno meshulach ela mishel Shechina. Curiously enough, if a person has tumas meis, he's come in contact with a corpse, which normally we say is the highest level of tumah, but when it comes to which camps you have to be ejected from, you are only ejected from the Shechina camp, the Mishkan proper, but you're allowed to remain in the Machane Levia. It's a little bit paradoxical, and we won't go into the reasons for it right now, but when you have Tumas Meis, you are allowed to be in the Machane Levia, but when you have Tumas Zav, you're only allowed to be in the Machane Yisrael, you can't be in the Machane Levia. Is that clear so far? Everyone got that? The Cholzeh Dorshu Rabboseinu min HaMikros v'Maseches Psachim. Our sages learned this all based on the verbiage of the pasuk that you have in front of you in Parshas Naso. They learn it out in the Gemara in Maseches Psachim. So Ayin Sham, if you want to learn out how the Gemara derives that the different types of tumah have different halachas vis-a-vis which camp they may reside in, then take a look at the Gemara in Psachim Daf Samach Zayin. Now, if you take a look at the Mishnah Maseches Kelim, then you find that the Mishnah equates the three camps to the situation in Yerushalayim. Lifnim min hachoma mikudash mehem. Now, this is in a series of Mishnayos. We're in the first chapter, the 8th Mishnah. That beyond, once you get into the walls of Yerushalayim, it's holier than the rest of Eretz Yisrael. Sha'ochlim sham kodshim kalim u'maiser sheni. That once you're in Yerushalayim, you're allowed to eat kodshim kalim, which are a lower category of sacrificial meats and foods, and you're allowed to eat maiser sheni, the produce that you have to bring up when you make a pilgrimage to Yerushalayim. So you eat those holy foods in the entire city of Yerushalayim. HaHabayit mikudash mimenu. So HaHabayit, the Temple Mount, is holier than the city of Yerushalayim. In what way? She'ein zavim v'zavos nidos v'yoldos nichnasim l'sham. That a zav and a zava, or a woman who's a nido or has just given childbirth, none of those people who have tumah of emission, of bodily fluid, are allowed to go to the temple, to the HaHabayit. Now, what does that line up with in what we just saw? What does HaHabayit therefore qualify as? Machane Levia. So Yerushalayim is Machane Yisrael, and where a Zav is allowed to reside, but a Zav cannot reside in Machane Levia, and as a result, he cannot go up to HaHabayit. And so Hachel Mikudash Mimenu. The Chel, which is the partition upon entry into the temple proper, is more sanctified than the HaHabayit. She'ein ovdei kochavim utmemes nichnasim l'sham. In that an idolater or a person who has come in contact with the dead is not allowed to enter into there. Ezras nashim mikudeshes mimenu. And then it goes on and it tells us that and once you're in the temple proper, there are also different gradations of holiness. But at least, and we'll stop the Mishnah there, but at least you see that you have different gradations. Yerushalayim is the Machane Yisrael. The HaHabayit is the Machane Levia. And the Beis HaMikdash itself is Machanei Shechina. It's the camp of the Shechina. Okay? Now let's take a look at an interesting Tosefta, because based on what we've just told you, if a person has Tumas Meis, is he allowed to go up to HaHabayit?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's dispel that one myth, that the reason why you can't go up to HaHabayit is not because you're Tumas Meis. You can go to HaHabayit and have Tumas Meis. The only thing that you can be concerned about is Tumas Zav. And the only thing that's not described here is what about Tumas Keri? Is Tumas Keri, which is a normative seminal emission, every time a person is intimate with his wife, he has Tumas Keri. And is that considered to be making you tamei enough to preclude you from Machanei Leviyah? That we haven't discussed yet, and that may be an issue. Now, there's a way to alleviate Tumas Keri. You don't need the ashes of a paraduma. Go to the mikveh, right? And you have to wait till Herav Shemesh. Okay? Anyway, let's take a look at the Tosefta. The Tosefta tells us quite explicitly about Tumas Meis. Source number 5. Nichnasu mitzorayim lifnim min hachoma lo kenesu arbaim. If a person is a mitzorah, and he goes into Yerushalayim, which is the Machanei Yisrael, he gets malchus, because he's violated the entry into the Machanei Yisrael. Zavin v'zavos nidos v'yoldos lahar habayis lokin shmonim. If these people enter into the Har Habayis, they get malchus twice. Now, why do they get malchus twice? I don't remember the reason why. Someone will have to explain it to me why they get malchus twice. I'll look it up shortly. But to Meis, now it could be what it really refers to, that a Mitzorah gets malchus twice, but a Zav and a Zava and a Nida only get malchus once. But I'll have to double check that.
He's going through two camps.
Yeah, well, the Mitzorah is going through two camps, but the Zav and the Zav is allowed to go into Yerushalayim. Okay. Tamei Meis nichnas lahar habayis. But a person who has Tumas Meis is allowed to enter into Har Habayis. Below Tamei Meis bilvad amru ela afilu meis atzma. And not only a person who has Tumas Meis, but even a corpse can be brought up to the Har Habayis. Shenemar vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imo. Because Moshe took the remains of Yosef with him out of Egypt. And where did Yosef keep the remains of Yosef? Imo benab b'machanei Leviyah. He kept Yosef's remains where Moshe resided, which was the Machanei Leviyah. And Rabbi Shimon Omer Hachel Bezuznashim Al Yisei Rebbeis Olam Betzmim Shlusham Turim. Okay, that's a different opinion. We won't go into that now. Let's take a look now at source number 6. We'll take a look.
He didn't take his mouth from the Shekhinah. Why did it allow him in the Beis Mikdash?
I didn't say Beis Mikdash. I said the Har Habayis.
Yeah. Oh, the Har Habayis.
The Har Habayis has a din of Machanei Leviyah. Okay.
But you can't take a mace on the Beis Mikdash.
No, you cannot take a mace, and you can't have Tumas Mace. If you're walking into the Beis Mikdash, you get kares for that. Okay. Now, comes along the Rambam, and this is in Hilchos Beis HaBechira Perek Vav. We're going to learn 3 halachas of the Rambam and one very important hasagas Aravid. One very important machlokas between the Rambam and the Ravid. Up until now, what we've been discussing is that which precludes a person from going to the Temple Mount if they have tumah. But this is all working under the assumption that the Beis HaMikdash is standing. What about when the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed? Does the Temple Mount and the place of the Beis HaMikdash retain its original tumah, its original kedusha, to preclude someone who's tamei from being able to go there? So halacha Yadalit states as follows: Kol makom shelo nasa b'chol elu ucheseder hazeh ein kadosh gamor. So first of all, the Rambam is continuing a discussion from the previous halacha, where he said that there is an actual protocol if the Sanhedrin wishes to expand the borders of the city of Jerusalem. They have to do so based upon a Navi's sanction, based upon the sanction of the Urim V'Tumim, based upon the sanction of a Kohen Gadol, and there's a whole sacrificial process that they have to do in order to officially expand the borders of the city of Yerushalayim. So that has to be done according to a very specific order, and And if it wasn't done in that way, but you just decided that you wanted to set up, a colony beyond the actual borders of Jerusalem, that's fine, but it doesn't have the sanctity of Yerushalayim. So today we would argue that, outside of the old city of the Yer Atikah, it doesn't have the sanctity of the original city of Yerushalayim. And v'zeh sha'asa Ezra shtei todos zikaron hu sha'asa. Now you may suggest, well, Ezra brought two karbanos in the same way that is necessary in order to sanctify the city of Yerushalayim. Why did he need to do it? So the Rambam says he really didn't need to do it. And the reason why he didn't need to do it is that because lo b'masav niskadesh hamakom shelo hayir sham lo melech v'lo urim v'tumim. The reason is because you can only do it with the sanction of the king and the urim v'tumim. And there was no king and there was no urim v'tumim when Ezra came back to sanctify Yerushalayim. So how could he sanctify Yerushalayim? But rather, ubamani skatsha v'kedusha rishona shekidsha shlomo shukidei sha'azar v'Yerushalayim l'shaitan v'kidshan la'asid lavo. So the answer is that when King Solomon, who was the king and had the Urim V'Tumim and had a Navi, he sanctified the entire Temple Mount and the entire city of Yerushalayim, and that Kedusha remains eternally. That Kedusha remains eternally. Now, it's very curious because we'll see momentarily that according to the Rambam, when Eretz Yisrael goes uninhabited and the Jewish people go into Galus, there are certain aspects of the Kedusha of the land of Israel that fall away, but the Rambam maintains, and we'll see that momentarily, but the Rambam maintains that the Kedusha of Yerushalayim never is lost. There's a fundamental difference between Kedushas Yerushalayim and Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. Kedushas Eretz Yisrael is contingent upon the Jewish population being there. Kedushas Yerushalayim and Kedushas HaHabayit is permanent and is not dependent upon a Jewish presence. Okay?
My understanding is that in these ancient times, there was a new city of Jerusalem outside the walls. If you ever see old art pieces, they always show there was colonies outside the walls. Wasn't that considered Jerusalem?
I don't know whether it has the Kedusha of Yerushalayim. In other words, maybe a Mitzorah would be allowed to live out there. I don't know. It seems from the way that the Rambam is describing the halacha that unless it was done during the Bayis Rishon when there was an Urim V'Tumim and a Melech, then that expansion project would not be part of Yerushalayim proper from a Kedusha standpoint.
Oh, that was my question. I thought maybe in Shlomo's time even.
It's possible. I'm not aware. I don't know from a historical...
Do we assume that the walls that the Ottomans built are the walls of the original...
I don't know. They're not... What?
Ir David is outside the walls.
Ir David is outside, so there probably is some difference, but it's not that much expanded outside of...
Oh, not like today, but I'm saying...
Right.
You see, they were outside...
Right, so I don't know. We'd have to ask an archaeologist to demarcate for us what actually are the borders of the original city of Yerushalayim, if such archaeology exists.
Because these walls were built by the Ottomans.
Yes. Right. Okay. Now, so that's the opinion of the Rambam. Comes along the Ravid, and he completely disagrees with the Rambam. The Ravid now says, Amar Avraham, you see where the italics begin, he says, Svaras atzmo hizu. This is the Rambam's own opinion, v'lo yadati me'ayin lo, and I don't know where he gets this from. In other words, there's no textual support in the Gemara or in the Psukim to support the Rambam's distinction of Kedusha Rishona Kidsha L'Shaita V'Kidsha L'Asid Lavo, that the original Kedusha of Yerushalayim is permanent, whereas the original Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael sometimes changes, is changeable. Uvekama Mekomos b'Mishnah, Im Ein Mikdash Yirakev, there's a halach in the Mishnayos in Maseches Ma'aser Sheni. We won't go into the technical aspects of the halacha, but the bottom line is that there's a difference in halacha regarding Ma'aser Sheni produce that was purchased with Ma'aser Sheni money, depending upon whether the temple is standing or not. So you see that the Kedusha status changes with the existence of a temple and with the absence of a temple. And the Gemara also talks about with the falling of the walls of the temple, the halacha changes. So he says, Alma l'man domer kedusha rishona lo kidsha la'asid lavo lo chalak bein mikdash liYerushalayim l'shar Eretz Yisrael. that you see, therefore, there is a machlokus in the Gemara whether the original Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is eternal or whether it's temporary. But one thing you do see is that question of whether it's permanent or whether it's temporary is pertinent also not only to the land of Israel but to the Yerushalayim and the HaHabayit as well. V'lo od elo sha'ani omer. But I'll go even one step further, says the Ravid. Not only should there be no difference between Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim and the HaHabayit, but I would even argue an argument in the opposite direction from the Rambam. The Rambam was the one who says that the Kedusha of Yerushalayim is eternal, and the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is contingent upon Jewish population. I say pum fakert. I say just the opposite. Shani omer shafilu Rabbi Yossi damar Kedusha shniya kitcha lo asilavo lo amar elo lishar Eretz Yisrael. I say that even according to the opinion in the Gemara which says that the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is permanent, that's only true about the rest of Eretz Yisrael. Aval Yerushalayim v'lamikdash lo amar. But the temple and the city of Jerusalem itself does not retain a permanent status of Kedusha. Lefi shahaya yodeya Ezra shahamikdash v'Yerushalayim asidim lihishtanos ulihishkadesh kiddush acher olami b'chvod Hashem la'olam. Because Ezra knew that the sanctity of Jerusalem and of the temple would eventually change. And because of that, there was no permanent sanctification of Yerushalayim and of the Temple Mount of the HaHabayit, because if anything, the Kedusha of HaHabayit and the Beis HaMikdash was subject to change in the future when Mashiach comes, when there'll be an even greater level of Kedusha. And so therefore no one in Jewish history ever permanently sanctified Yerushalayim and the HaHabayit, because anyone, and he gives a specific example of Ezra knew that this Kedusha was subject to change. And because he knew that the Kedusha was subject to change, he made it specifically contingent upon the Jewish population of the time, and he waited for Mashiach to give it its permanent status. So that's the opinion of the Ravid. Kach nigla li misod Hashem li'reiv. This was revealed to me as one of God's secrets to those who fear Him. Lefichach, and this is the punchline, says the Ravid, hanichnas ata sham ein bo kares. That if a person were to enter into, on top of the HaHabayit, even into the Makom HaMikdash itself, even into the place of the Beis HaMikdash itself, you would not get kares, because according to the Ravid, the original Kiddush of the Beis HaMikdash is no longer extant on HaHabayit. So up until now, we've only been talking about the Kedusha of Machane Levia, which is the HaHabayit outside the Beis HaMikdash. There we can argue that a mace can go even according to the Rambam. But the Ravid is now saying that if you technically there's no kares, there's no penalty if you're tameh, even tumas mace, and you go all the way into the Makom HaMikdash, even to the place of the actual Beis HaMikdash, even the Holy of Holies. There's no Kedusha there anymore. Okay, so the question is, what?
Or is he saying that?
Or is he saying that?
Or is he just saying that you're still not permitted to go, but you don't get cars?
Yeah.
Or is he saying that there's no kares? It's a very curious language. It's a good point, Laser. Well, then the question is, what would there be? What remnant would there be? So it's a good point. It could be, and this is the way some poskim learn, is that it's all the Ravid is saying is that you don't get kares, but there still is an isser to go if you have tumas mace. Good. It's a good ha'ara. Let's take a look at halacha tesvav in the Rambam, and we'll see how far we can get tonight. I don't know how far we'll get, but we'll see. So the Rambam continues. So we're going to put aside the Ravid for now. Let's just remember, what is the Rambam's opinion? The Rambam's opinion is that the Kedusha of Yerushalayim and the HaHabayit is permanent. Even in the absence of a temple, you have permanent Kedusha on HaHabayit. Lefichach makriven akarbonos kul and apel pi she'ein sham bayis banui. One very important ramification for the Rambam's opinion is that you can still offer karbonos on the Temple Mount on the HaHabayit, even though there's no temple present, because the existence of the walls of a temple are not a requirement for offering karbonos. As long as you have the kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash, you can offer karbonos. This is one of the reasons why they say the Lubavitcher Rebbe never went to Eretz Yisrael, because he didn't want to be there on Pesach and have the chiyuv of having to bring korban Pesach. So, va'ochlin kadshe kadshim b'chol ha'azara, and you can eat kadshe kadshim, meet a higher form of kedusha of karbanos, throughout the entire courtyard area, apal pisha hi chareva, even though it's destroyed. Ve'ena mukefes b'mechitza, and it's not surrounded with walls. Va'ochlin kadshim kalam u'maiser sheni b'chol Yerushalayim, apal pisha ein sham chamos, sha'kedusha rishona kitshel shayita v'kitshel asid lava. And when it comes to kadshim kalim, lighter forms of sacrificial meat, and Meiser Sheni produce that has to be brought up to Yerushalayim for consumption, even if the walls of Jerusalem are completely demolished, you can still eat the produce in Yerushalayim proper, as long as you know where the borders of Yerushalayim are, because the original Kedusha of Yerushalayim and of HaHabayit remains, and the Beis HaMikdash remains eternally. Let's go on to Halacha Tes Zayin. V'lama ani omer.
It's interesting, the fact that he says we can actually do all this means we can go.
Provided that you're tahor. You have to be tahor first. That's the catch.
Yeah.
You know, you'd have to get a paraduma,
Right.
and purify yourself from tumas meis.
Right.
Don't you also need a mizbeach?
What?
Don't you also need a mizbeach?
Yeah, so you'll build a mizbeach.
But you can't.
Why can't you build a mizbeach?
Because then building a mizbeach now is like building a bama, which you can't do.
No, a bama is only outside of HaHabayit. If it's in the Mokom HaMikdash, it's not a bama. Bummer. Okay. Halacha Tes Zayin. V'lama ani omer b'mikdash v'Yerushalayim kedusha rishona kitchel asid lavo. So v'kedush hashar Eretz Yisrael le'inyan shvius u'maisvus v'chayotze behen lo kitchel asid lavo. On what basis do I say that the kedusha of Yerushalayim and the HaHabayit is eternal, and the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is not eternal? Now, what are the ramifications of the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael not being eternal? The laws of Shemitah don't apply. At least they're only rabbinic versus being biblical. By the way, one of the very important phenomena that is taking place in our own lifetime is that the laws of Shemitah are shifting from D'Rabbanan to D'Oraisa. As soon as there is the majority of the Jewish population occupying Eretz Yisrael, so the mitzvah of Shemitah becomes a mitzvah D'Oraisa. Until now, up until now, the mitzvah Shemitah has only been D'Rabbanan because you don't have the majority of the population, which is what the Rambam is saying. But once the majority comes back to Eretz Yisrael, the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael comes back full force. And again, I'm not an expert in this area, but there are probably etlecha nafkaminas in halacha, and it's going to take place within the next few years. I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot about this over the next few years when Shemitah becomes D'Oraisa. Okay? So he says, Lefi shekedushas hamikdash v'Yerushalayim mipnei hashchina. So let me tell you the difference, says the Rambam. He says the holiness of the HaHabayit and of the BAYT HaMikdash in Yerushalayim is because of the Shechina, of the divine presence. U'Shechina eina b'teila. The divine presence can never be removed or annulled from a place. Once the Shechina is welcomed into a place, it's there forever.
Even if it leaves?
Even if it leaves.
Har Sinai?
It's a good question. So he says that I guess you have to say that once the sanctification was set in, that this is a makom mekudash for permanence, Har Sinai was never meant to be a permanent seat of the divine presence. I guess even from the very inception of Har Sinai, it was always meant as a temporary stopping place. But I guess once we sanctified a place as being the seat, the permanent residence of the Shechina, that residence can never lose its kedusha. V'harehu omer v'hashimosias mikdashechem. Now the Torah says in the Tochacha that God says, I will destroy your holy places if you don't follow my laws. V'amru chachamim apal pi sheshomim in b'kedushas anhei. And our sages teach us from there that even if the structure of the temple is destroyed, they still retain their kedusha. Avol chiyuv haaretz b'shvius u'v'maisros eino ela mipnei shehu kibush rabim. But the special laws of Shemitah and of Meiser and of tithes that are related to Eretz Yisrael is that the status or the holiness of Israel is based on the power of the people. It's not the power of the Shekhinah, it's the power of the people. So when you have a majority of Eretz Yisrael occupying the land, they infuse the land with Kedusha. It's an amazing idea, what the Rambam is telling us in this very short paragraph. The Keven shenilkecha haaretz miyad dehem batel hakibush v'niftera min haTorah mimaisus uvashlius. And once the land was taken away from us, and the people power was no longer there because we were no longer a majority in our land, so then we were relieved of these mitzvahs of Shemitah and Meiser. Shaharei Eina min Eretz Yisrael, because it's no longer part of Eretz Yisrael. It no longer has the Kiddush of Eretz Yisrael. The Keven Shala Ezra v'Kidsha lo Kidsha v'Kibush ela b'Chazaka. And that's why I said originally that when Ezra came back to Eretz Yisrael to build the second temple, he didn't have to re-sanctify it. He just had to affirm its sanctity. Shehechziku ba, ufichach kol makom shehechziku ba oli bavel v'niskadesh b'kedushas Ezra hashniya hu mekudosh hayom be'afal pi shenilkach haaretz mimenu v'chayev b'shviyus u'v'maisus al derech shebiranu b'hilchos truma. Okay, so just to clarify, this last paragraph this last part is talking about the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael that existed in the times of Ezra. I guess he's saying that he didn't have to reconquer, but just to assert residency was enough to affirm the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael vis-a-vis the laws of Shemitah and the laws of Meiser. But that's ancillary to our discussion. In any event, you see this very important machlokes between the Rambam and the Ravid regarding the Kedusha of HaHabayit. According to the Ravid, the Kedusha of HaHabayit is no longer extant, nor is the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash. And according to the Rambam, it's permanent, it's irrevocable. Let's take a look at one more Rambam. Yeah.
Didn't the Rambam visit the HaHabayit when he was in Eretz Yisrael?
There is a story about the Rambam, but it's and I have to get the details for you, but it's not clear whether it was the Rambam or not. It says there's a story about Rabbi Moshe, and some say that it was the Rambam, some say that it was a different Rabbi Moshe, could have even been the Ramban, but it seems to have taken place in the 12th century, in which case it stands to reason that it was the Rambam himself. So yeah, that's it's an interesting point. Okay, Halacha Zayin. Halacha Zayin of the 7th parak of Hilchos Beis Avechira, the Rambam says, Afal Pisha Hamikdash Hayom Charev Ba'avonosenu, even though the temple nowadays is destroyed because of our sins, Chayav Adam B'mora'o Kemo Shehaya Noheg Bo B'Vinyano. A person still has to show a sense of awe in the presence of the temple, even though it's not there. Lo yikanes el lamokum shemutar li yikanes l'sham, and therefore he's only allowed to go into those parts of the Temple Mount of the HaHabayit where he's halachically permitted. V'lo yeshev ba'azara, nor even if he's tohor, would he be allowed to sit on the HaHabayit places where the temple used to stand. V'lo yakel rosho keneged shar hamizrach, nor is he allowed to have any levity if he's standing anywhere near where the eastern gate was, the entrance to the Beis HaMikdash. Shenamar Shabbos Osai Tishmoru Umikdashi Tiro. As the Torah says, the Torah connects in Parshas Acharemos, it connects, is it Acharemos or Kedoshim, I don't remember, but it connects Shabbos to the awe you're supposed to have for the temple. Mashmir Shabbos La'olam, Af Mora Mikdash La'olam, Afal Pisha Charev B'Kedushaso Omeid. That just like Shabbos observance is eternal, so too is the awe or reverence that one must show for the temple has to be eternal, even when it's destroyed. So this will be quite relevant in our discussion of the Ravid. Does this mean that the Ravid argues and he says that the laws of reverence no longer apply because the Kedusha is no longer there? Or will he agree with the drasha of the Rambam that even though I hold that the Kedusha doesn't exist anymore, vis-a-vis the laws of Tumah, but perhaps the Mora Mikdash may still apply based upon this other drasha that the Rambam makes of as Shabbosai Tishmaru Umikdashi Tiro, which is a different teaching. Okay, so that's where we are up until now. Let's go a little weiter. Okay, the next source that we're going to see is a 14th century work, early 14th century, called Sefer Kaftor V'Ferach. And I give you the biographical information of who was the author of the Kaftor V'Ferach. It was a Rabbi Ishtori Haparchi, born in 1280, dies in 1355. He was from Provence, and he learned Torah and medicine and other sciences, but then he made Aliyah, he settled in Beit Sha'an, and he writes a lot in this sefer called Kaftor V'Ferach about his experiences in Eretz Yisrael. And he chronicles a lot of the things that he has witnessed to and a lot of the halachas that are extant in his time. So the first thing that he writes, well, I mean, there's a lot of things that he writes. We're really coming into the middle of a discussion. He says, Kedushas Habayis La'olam. The holiness of the temple is eternal, as the Rambam had said. Achar she'inyan kain, this being the case, hanichnas hayom sha'anu tmeim b'makom habayit chayav karet. If a person were to go in the place where the temple used to stand, he would get kares for that. V'hiskim bazeh mohari harav Baruch Zal. And my Rebbe Rav Baruch agrees with this. Gam ki omar elai b'Yerushalayim k'shehevesi alav zeh hasefer la'avor alav u'lahayiko. And when I was just completing this work that you are reading right now, says the Kaftor V'Ferach, I brought it to my Rebbe for him to look it over, and he told me something about a story in Yerushalayim that took place several years ago. He says, Sherabeinu Yechiel de Paris zal Omar Lavo Yerushalayim. Rabbi Chiel, one of the Balei HaTosfos, Rabbi Chiel of de Paris, wanted to make Aliyah to Yerushalayim. V'hu b'shnas sheva esrei le'elaf hashishi. It was the 17th year of the 6th millennium, which is the year 5017, which is the year 1257. So it's several decades after the Kaftor V'Ferach is writing this. V'sheyakriv karbanos bizman hazeh, and Rabbi Yechiel also wanted to argue that you could bring karbanos bizman hazeh. Va'ani mitirdasi lahashlim imo hamelacha lo she'altiv ma na'aseh mitu maseinu va'ana hakohen hamiyuchas. So when my Rebbe Rav Baruch told me this story, I was in such a rush to finish my book and get back and bring it to the printer, or not the printer, the scribe. I forgot to ask him a very simple question. I forgot to ask him, like, how could Rabbi Yechiel de Paris want to bring karbanos bisman hazeh? What are you going to do about tumah? And what are you going to do about finding a kohen who is properly miyuchas, as yichus, and can do the avodah for you? Right? Those are two big hurdles, two big obstacles to bringing a korban bisman hazeh. So anochi baderech lifnei Shilo shav limakomi niskarti halacha she'ein lachush ala tumah. So as I was going back to my place, and I was on my way, I was walking through Shiloh, I remembered at that moment that you don't have to worry about the laws of Tumah when there are certain circumstances applicable. That what? There's a special halacha that not only can you bring a korban sibor, a communal sacrifice on Shabbos, even though normally you're not allowed to be machal Shabbos for anything, you're allowed to bring a communal korban. And the other thing that you're allowed to do for the sake of a communal korban is that if the majority of the Jewish people are tameh, you can bring a korban even in a state of tumah. So that would alleviate our problem, and that would only necessitate an even more of a compelling reason why we should bring the korban pesach bisman hazeh, even though we're all tameh.
Yeah.
No, korban pesach is considered a korban sibur as well.
Oh, even though groups did them.
Yeah. V'zeh kagon she'ihi rov hakohanim timeim makrivin hakarbanos b'tumah, and that means that if the majority of the kohanim available are tameh, then they would be allowed to bring it in a state of tumah. V'chein maseches psachim perak keitzad solin nitma kahalo rubo o shahayu kohanim timeim b'hakahal tohor yaseh b'tumah. So I realized that if the majority of the kohanim are tameh, or the majority of the community is tameh, then you can still do the avodah.
But I thought kohanim weren't tameh.
Well, how can that be?
They don't go near mace.
So we say that invariably, a kohen over the course of his lifetime has probably inadvertently come in contact with a mace. We all have a chazaka of having tumas mace.
Even kohanim.
Even Kohanim, yeah. The question is, and that may be a subject of a future Sugya Shiur, if a person is already Tameh, is he permitted to, if a Kohen is already Tameh, is there any prohibition for him to expose himself to further Tumah? What is he doing wrong?
By not going to cemetery.
Yeah, so why
do
can't...
you tell Kohanim not to go to cemetery?
Yeah, why do you tell Kohanim not to go to cemeteries if they already have Tumah Smeis?
Don't Kohanim go to cemeteries when it's apparent of theirs?
They don't.
Yeah, well, I'm saying a Kohen can come in contact with a mace for a parent. Right, so Shlomo is asking, well, what if you know? What if you're a Kohen, you know you never came in contact? Yeah, all right. Anyway, Kosav Aleim HaRambam Zal, so the Rambam writes in his Perush HaMishnayos, he says, Da ze ha'ikr b'zochreu b'avineu hu kitumas meis bilvad hu shetidcha b'tzibor shetidache b'tzibor v'yakrivu b'tumah. So the one thing that the Rambam writes that you have to know, he says, is that the only kind of tumah that is alleviated when the majority of the Jewish people are tameh is only tumah smeis, is only the tumah of having come in contact with the dead. U'maseches yoma perakama itmar tumah smeis. Rav Nachman Amar hutar hu b'tzibor, Rav Sheshes Amar duchuyi b'tzibor, etc., etc., etc. He says, Avol, if you skip a line, he says, Avol hatimeim b'tumah acheres kagon zavin v'zavos nidos u'tumei sheretz u'nevela v'chayotze bahem lo yisasku bo v'lo yikansu la'azar. But if a person has another kind of tumah, such as tumah zav, tumah nida, tumah sheretz, he's not allowed to engage in any of this stuff, nor is he allowed to come to the azara. V'im avru va'asu anichnasu la'azar. If they do that and they come into the temple, so chayavin karas al habia umisa al ha'avoda. If a Kohen were to have tumah zav, and he were to come into the Beis HaMikdash, or the place where the Beis HaMikdash used to stand, so then he would get kares, and he would get misa b'dei shamayim for doing avoda in a state of tumah. Shalom nidches el tumah smeis. The only thing that's pushed off is tumah smeis. Bilvad in kain ein lanu lekarev mipesach HaHabayit v'lifnim kimisham v'hala hu machanei levio chedisa b'tosefta le'el v'adayin narach b'zeh b'hagah. And therefore, it would not be appropriate for us to go anywhere from the entry of the HaHabayit inwards, because that's where the Machanei Levia is. Now, the Kaptur of Aferach is very unclear, because if we know that a Zav, he's clear that he's saying that a Zav and a Nida is not allowed to enter into Machanei Levia. And basically, I guess he's saying is that since we can't be careful about who's Tameh and who's not Tameh, no one should go into the HaHabayit today, because you could have Tumah Zav or Tumah Nida, and therefore you can't go in. I'm just skipping a whole bunch. He says, "Mikol ze yireh ki mashan oroim hayom bizmanenu zeme hakotalim haomdim ha'ela." He says nowadays, and remember, he's describing the Temple Mount in the 14th century. So it's going to be very hard for us to really extrapolate and apply what he's saying about what he's seeing in the 14th century to what we see today, because the geography could have shifted completely. But he comes along and he says that based upon all the aforementioned, he says we have walls that are all around where the Temple Mount used to be. Shehin kotlim mechomas HaHabayis. These are the walls of the HaHabayis. Od hayom nikar sha'ar shoshan lemizrach v'hu sagur avnei gazit. He says even to this day you can see the sealed off Shoshan gate or Shushan gate in the east, and it is sealed off with a certain kind of cut stone. In kain hayom shanachnu b'chata'enu mibachutz nuchal lihiskarev le'inyan tefila v'yishtachavaya ad osam hakesalim. So now, because of our sins, we are on the outs, meaning that we're like in exile, so to speak. So and we're in a state of tumah, we can only come up to those walls that come up to the HaHabayit. V'chein amadavar boyim ad osam hakoislim u'mispalalim lokel yis'al lifnei elu hashnei hasha'orim she'izkarnu. And that's what we do today. We go up to the walls of the HaHabayit, but we don't go past them. And Shlomo davened to Hashem that anytime a Jew davens in that area that's nearby the HaHabayit, that Hashem should accept his tefillah. So basically, the Kaptur of Aferach ends with saying that even though we can't go up to the HaHabayit today because of our tumah, nevertheless, there's an efficacy, there's an advantage to davening right up to the entrance of HaHabayit, because it's a place where Hashem, as Shlomo had declared, it's a place where Hashem accepts our tefillah. Okay. So at least you see that the Kaftor of Aferach is machmir like the Rambam, and he says that the Kedusha is there, and you can't even go into the HaHabayit. Now take a look at the Meiri, and you're going to see a totally different opinion. The Meiri says, and this is the Meiri in Masechah Shavuos Daf Tes Zayin, the Meiri says, and with this I guess we'll have to finish because we ran out of time, but we'll have to take a look at the Radbaz next time. Shita zu shekasavnu lechalek ben shar Eretz Yisrael Yerushalayim u'mikdash kachu das gedolei hamecharim shekasvua. He says this opinion that we've delineated, that there is a difference between the kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash, which is permanent, and the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, which is non-permanent. This is the opinion of the gedolei hamechabrim. Who does that mean? The gedolei hamechabrim, the great compiler. Who's the great compiler in the language of the Meiri? That's the Rambam, right? So, b'chol sha'atamot say v'talmud she'yera'eh lecha misham shekdusha b'shana lo kitshel asid lavo atam mefarsha b'shar Eretz Yisrael v'chol she'yera'eh lecha misham shekitshel asid lo asid atam amida b'Yerushalayim u'mikdash. And therefore, any piece of Gemara that implies that the kedusha is permanent is a reference to the Beis Hamikdash. Any place in the Gemara that implies that the kedusha is non-permanent is actually referring to the rest of Eretz Yisrael. However, u'gedolei hameforshim kasvu b'haga hosehem. But now the gedolei hameforshim, not the gedolei hamechabrim, the gedolei hameforshim. Who's the gedolei hameforshim referred to?
Ravid.
The Ravid, because it's a commentary or an explanation of the Rambam. So the Ravid wrote, "Sha'af b'kedusha shniya lo nemra el l'shar Eretz Yisrael v'lo Yerushalayim mikdash Yodei haz Yehaya Ezra she'asidim lishtanos liskadesh b'chvod olami." And he disagrees, and he says just vice versa. The Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is permanent, but the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash is non-permanent because Ezra knew that it was only a temporary status, the second temple, and that eventually it would be sanctified with its permanent status when Mashiach would come. And the last line is very telling. The Meiri says, "V'hanichnas achshav l'sham." According to the Ravid, if a person goes there today, ein bo karis does not get karis, as the Ravid had said. And then the Meiri says, "V'haminag pashut likanei sham lefi ma sheshamanu." And the minhag is to go up to the HaHabayit, based on what I've heard. Sounds like the Meiri never went to Eretz Yisrael. He says, but I hear that people today go to the HaHabayit, and it must be because they paskin like the Ravid. So just one last thing, we don't have a chance to go into the Radbaz. The Radbaz is machmir like the Rambam as well. But if you just take a look at the Magen Avram on the very last page, the very back of your packet, the Magen Avram is going on Orach Chaim Siman Tav Kuf Samach Aleph, talking about what you're supposed to do when you see the city of Yerushalayim. And he quotes the machlokas between the Rambam and the Ravid. And at the very end he says, I underlined it, he says, V'imkein divrei harambam shiririm v'kayomim. He says the words of the Rambam are shiririm v'kayomim. That means that they're like permanent. They're the ones that you go by. V'hanichnas atal l'makam hamikdash chayv kares shekulanu t'mei mesim. That if a person would go to the place of the Beit HaMikdash today, he'd get kares, because today we all have the status of tumas meis. So it's, even though the Meiri sides with the Ravid as a defense to the current minhag that he has heard about, the Magen Avram, which is the final word, and the Mishnah Berurah echoes the words of the Magen Avram, we paskin like the Rambam. We paskin like the Rambam bisman hazeh. Now what the ramifications are would be that if you know exactly the place of the Beit HaMikdash, you couldn't go there, and if you have any suffix of that maybe the Beit HaMikdash could have been in this place, then it's a suffix kares. And you can't go there, and there's no way to sanctify yourself because we don't have the ashes of the paraduma.
But HaHabayit is okay.
But HaHabayit would be okay as long as you alleviated yourself of tumas zav, tumas nida, and possibly even tumas keri. And that's what we're going to see in Eretz Hashem next time. We're going to go to the modern shuvas, and we'll see how the post 1967 dealt with this issue when Jews now want to go up to HaHabayit. Okay. Take care. Have a good night.